Well, it's good to see everyone again this morning, and we continue our messages, our series of messages all about Jesus, all about Jesus. This morning we're running with the Hogs. We're running with the Hogs. This is one of my prized possessions in my house. It was undoubtedly one of my mother's prized possessions. She had this thing displayed prominently in her house. Now, if you can't see, it's a trophy, and at the top of that trophy is a hog. And my mother had this trophy placed where you could see it in her house whenever you walked in. And I will tell you that if you ask about it, she was proud to tell you that she won this trophy for winning a hog calling contest in 1995. It wasn't the only hog calling contest she won. She won several of them, and she was very proud of the time that she entered one out at Alton, if you've been to the ballpark there. And she entered one, and when she reared back on, whoop, pig, some hogs in an adjacent field came running. And she was quite proud of that. Now, when my mother passed away in 2018, and I was the executor of the estate, I told my sister, I said, I don't care what you want. You take whatever you want, I don't care. But I want this trophy because it was something my mother cherished. And yes, it is in our house as well. It's displayed in our family room when I get back home tonight. She cherished that because when she would call the hogs, what happened? They would come running. Now, hogs, I don't know if any of you have dealt with them much in the past or not, but hogs will come running for a lot of reasons. They're not the fastest animals in the world, but if you've ever dealt with them, you know for a fact that a hog is extremely, incredibly strong for its size. And when there's a herd of them running at you, it can be a bit unnerving, can it not? Now, I'm going to tell you that in a scripture we're going to look at today, there's an episode from the life of Christ that draws several different emotions. And they're not always the normal events I get when I read about something in the life of Christ. This one causes some fear, but in a healthy way, about the power of Christ. But it also causes me to ask, why did Jesus do this? Because we're going to see that a group of hogs were the ones to whom Jesus cast demons. Why did he do that? But the response of one person in this story is exactly what our response should be about Jesus Christ. I want you to remember that Jesus' power over Satan is a reason for us to have joy. So I want you to read along with me in Luke chapter 8. Luke chapter 8, starting in verse 26 through 39. And here we read, Then they sailed to the country of the Gerasenes, which is opposite Galilee. When Jesus had stepped out on land, there met him a man from the city who had demons. For a long time he had worn no clothes, and he had not lived in a house, but among the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and he said with a loud voice, What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. For he had commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. For many a time it had seized him, and he was kept under guard and bound with chains and shackles. But he would break the bonds and be driven by the demon into the desert. Then Jesus asked him, What is your name? And he said, Legion, for many demons had entered him. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. So he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and drowned. When the herdsmen saw what had happened, they fled and told it to the city and in the country. Then people went out to see what had happened, and they came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone sitting at his feet, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it told them how the demon-possessed man had been healed. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. But the man from whom the demons had gone begged that he might be with him. But Jesus sent him away, saying, "Return to your home and declare how much God has done for you." And he went away, proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. Wow! This story. This is one of those stories that every time I read it, I have to sit back and sometimes do a double take. Because you might want to read it again. Because there's so many moving parts in this story. But the bottom line is the same. It's that Jesus has power over Satan, and that's reason for joy. That's the bottom line here. So I want you to look at some things this morning. They're in your bulletin on the outline there. You can take some notes. But the first one is begging Jesus. Begging Jesus. We live in a time in which it seems like there's so much evil in the world, don't we? Seems like there's a lot of evil. And if you ever wonder if evil will overtake this world, then you need to read this story over and over again. And you can find different accounts of this story in Matthew chapter 8 and in Mark chapter 5. But throughout this story you find Jesus has the power over evil. Now there are a lot of people who discount the possibility of demonic activity in the world today. Some regard it lightly. And when we regard it lightly, you know something? That's dangerous. You know, it really concerns me that we see the devil and demons in kind of a lighthearted way. And it kind of bothers me that, you know, some high schools and colleges inadvertently promote that spirit with mascots that are named the devils or the demons. When I was in high school at Anderson County High School, we had several big rivals, and two of our big rivals were the Shelbyville Red Devils and the Henry Clay Blue Devils. And when I was working for the Anderson News, occasionally I would cover games, sporting events that included Anderson County playing against the Williamstown Demons. Locally here, I had to check this out, and if I'm wrong on this, you can blame Justin. Okay, but I heard, it seemed like I remember people telling me that the mascot here was the Mackville Red Devils. Now, before anybody gets bent out of shape, I believe that the people made those names innocently, not realizing that they might be inadvertently causing a lighthearted view of Satan. But sadly, far too many people look at Satan and his followers and the demons as a clown-like figure. I think about it collegiately. DePaul University, which is a Catholic school in Chicago, goes by the Blue Demons. Now, folks, would that thing scare you? Not me. Maybe if you're a kid or something, it might, but it wouldn't scare me. And then, of course, there's everybody around here's favorite, Duke University, which began as a university that was founded by the Methodists and the Quakers. And it was known as Trinity College for 65 years. What's their mascot? The Blue Devils. Now, folks, would you be scared of a devil that looks like that? Maybe that goatee, but that's about it. Ironically, a lot of people around here, since they hate Duke because of basketball, ironically, Duke is has a world-renowned divinity school there on campus. You know, we're coming up on the Halloween season. You know, people want to argue back and forth. I'm not going to argue one way or the other. But I'm just going to tell you that if you do celebrate Halloween, at least don't take the devil lightly. That's what I beg you. Don't take the devil lightly. Don't take Satan and his power lightly. Because from the text we just read, what do we see about Satan? What do we see about the demons? Those guys had power. They had power. But we'll also see that Jesus' power is much greater. You see, Jesus encountered a man who had been overtaken by demons. Jesus sailed into a country that was called the country of the Gerasenes, or if you look in Matthew, it would say the country of Gadarene. And it was southeast of the Sea of Galilee. Immediately, after he got on land, he was met by a man who was overcome with demons. Some scholars believe that this man made a practice of molesting people when he got close to them. Now we don't know, I can't say that for sure, but several scholars believe that. This man was naked. He didn't have a house. He just lived in the tombs for a long time. He had frequent seizures, and his strength caused by those demons was so strong that when they put chains on him, what did he do? He broke those chains. Folks, let me tell you something. You break a chain, you're strong. That's the kind of strength he had. This man, Matthew talks about two, so it probably as this man was kind of the ringleader here of the demons. This man, though, if he was in our society today, we would say, he's insane. He needs to be locked up. He'd be a threat to society, would he not? We would say this man is one that needs to be locked up away from people. He was overtaken by demons, and there's no question about that. But look at what he did. Look at verse 28. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him, and he said with a loud voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me." That was the demons talking. They knew who Jesus was. They knew his power. And they knew that Jesus had the power to send them to the holding place for their ultimate destruction. Jesus asked this man, said, "What's your name?" And the demons replied, "Legion." For there were many. Legion was a Roman army group of, I don't know how many you would describe it, but it was about 4,000 to 6,000 soldiers. Whether that was the number of demons that had overtaken this man, we don't know. That really doesn't matter. The fact is that the demons possessed this poor man were many, and they knew their time was at hand because they were confronting Jesus. And they were begging Jesus not to destroy them. Look there at verse 31. And they begged him not to command them to depart into the abyss. That's the power of Jesus. He had that power over demons, and they knew he had it. So, what am I asking you to do this morning? Just really two things. One is, don't take the devil lightly. Don't mess around with the one whose demons, his followers, overtook a man, caused him to walk around naked, live in caves, and serve in tombs, and he was strong enough to break chains. And some will say, well, John, that happened 2,000 years ago. And I will counter to you that I believe demon possession is rampant again today. We live in a world that has got much, much evil. Do we not? Much evil. I have no other explanation for some of the things that happen in our world other than Satan is rampant and his demons are rampant in the world. There's no other explanation that makes sense. Don't take the devil lightly, but also know that Jesus is greater. The evil in our world is troubling and disheartening, is it not? It's very troubling. But Jesus is greater and has authority even over demons. Remember what the demons said? Look again. They said, when he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell down before him. And he said with a loud voice, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, do not torment me. They were begging Jesus. Folks, we don't have to beg Jesus for salvation. Jesus offers it. We just have to accept. Go before Jesus, begging for his grace, but in the long run, all we have to do is accept Jesus' offer of salvation. Unlike those demons. Second, rejecting Jesus. Rejecting Jesus. To me, the reaction of what the people did to what Jesus did is somewhat baffling. Let's look there in verse 37, Luke 8:37. Then all the people of the surrounding country of the Gerasenes asked him to depart from them, for they were seized with great fear. So he got into the boat and returned. Here was Jesus, who had just driven out demons from a man well known to be a menace to society. He had driven these demons from them, or from him rather. And what did the people do? They said, we want you to leave. We want you to depart from here. Maybe this is just me, but I would see that as a reason to worship, wouldn't you? I would see it as a reason to worship. Instead, they saw it as a reason to reject Jesus and run him off. But let's back up a little bit. Think about what Jesus had done with the demons. The demons had begged Jesus to not send them into the abyss or the holding place for the evil spirits awaiting their destruction. You can read up on that in Revelation chapter 9 and verses 1 through 6. But then you pick up here in Luke 8:32 and 33, and listen to what they said. Now a large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him to let them enter these. And he gave them permission. Then the demons came out of the man and entered the pigs, and the herd rushed down a steep bank into the lake and drowned. Now I'm going to admit, folks, there was a time when I read this passage, and it perplexed me. Mark wrote that the herd numbered around 2,000 pigs, or as we say around here, they were hogs. They were hogs. Folks, my farm, when I grew up, we had mainly cattle, but we always had just a few hogs. We had 3 or 4 sows usually, and that's a very small amount, 3 or 4. That's not enough to even really count. But if you had 3 or 4 sows, what are they going to have twice a year? They're going to have litters. And they're going to have 7 or 8 pigs each time. So when they would have their litters there until we could sell those pigs, we had quite a few on the farm. Now, we didn't make a lot of money on them, but folks, we always had bacon and sausage in the freezer. Always. But when I first studied this, I thought to myself, why would Jesus do this? Why would he send those demons into pigs? Why would he send them into hogs? 2,000 of them. And then you read it. Luke mentions herdsmen. So apparently they were not wild hogs. These were someone's livelihood. These were somebody's animals. Now there's some possible explanations. Some scholars note that the keepers were Jews. And what did God tell the Jews about pigs? To stay away. Leviticus chapter 11 verses 7 and 8 says, "And the pig, because it parts the hoof and is cloven-footed, but does not chew the cud, is unclean to you. You shall not eat of their flesh, and you shall not touch their carcasses. They are unclean to you." So that's one possible explanation. Another could be that the demons just didn't want to leave this area, and Jesus granted their wish that they could continue their mischief while here on the earth. Perhaps these demons were drawn to pigs because they are considered an unclean, filthy animal. The bottom line is we really don't know why Jesus did this. It's not addressed in the text. Anything we say is speculation. But ultimately, those hogs, just like everything else on this earth, is ultimately God's, is it not? And he had the right to do what he wanted to do. One scholar I read about this text, Norval Geldenhuys, said, "Whatever the reason was why the Savior allowed the evil spirits to enter into the swine, with the result that the animals were drowned, we know that he acted in perfect wisdom and righteousness, and he had the divine right to act as he did." So why did the people want Jesus to leave? Verse 35 said they saw the man, he'd been healed, he was fully clothed, and he was in his right mind. But in verse 37 it says, they had great fear. Instead of believing in Jesus, who had forcibly demonstrated that he had power over Satan and power over the demons, they rejected him. This was a miraculous healing. But instead of feeling grateful, they feared his power. Maybe they feared that the same thing might happen to them. They may have had animals as well. I don't know. Geldenhuys suggested also that it's evidence they had a guilty conscience. That they saw the demons go into the pigs and they said, we will lose what this as well. Whatever the case, it looks like they attached far too much value on physical things rather than the salvation of a demon-possessed man and their own possessions as well. Folks, we need to understand that Jesus had that power, and we've got to accept it. You know, this week, I was confronted by this many times. You know, I've never seen anyone cast demons into hogs. I've never seen that. And I hope you've not either. But I have seen how wonderful God's works are and the power. Are you confronted with that every day? Just this week, Stephanie and I accompanied Peyton Medley down to a visit at Kentucky Christian University in Grayson. And this was Thursday morning, and we left before the sun rose. And as we were driving east on I-64, the sun was coming up. And, you know, the first thing I did was had to grab my sunglasses because I was almost blinded. But if you've ever driven east into the sunrise or driven west into the sunset, you see the beauty of God's creation unfolding right before your eyes. Do you not? It's something that is just something to behold. And that was something I could not get over this morning, or this week. It was just absolutely beautiful sight. And then as we drove on up past Mount Sterling, and the rolling hills started turning into small mountains, I was just marveled at the everyday beauty of God's creation. Just the little things we take for granted. Just the beauty of it. And those things are available to everyone. Romans chapter 1 says that because of these things, men are without excuse. Men who don't believe in God are without excuse. Well, here in this text we just read from Luke chapter 8, the people saw the power of God, not the beauty of creation, but they saw the power of God, yet they rejected it. My question to you is, what are you doing with Christ? We see creation. We see changed lives. And yet some totally reject Jesus. There's others, maybe some of you sitting here this morning, I don't know. But there are some who refuse to totally let go and let God work through themselves. Maybe we're afraid that Jesus will call us to do something we don't want to do. But think about it. If he had the power, if Jesus had the power over those demons there at the Gerasenes, he can use that same power for the good. And what can he do with you? Don't reject him. Instead, proclaim him. That's the last thing I want to look at this morning. Proclaim Jesus. In my mind, this story has a very cool ending, because the man that was healed actually wanted to tag along with Jesus. Some say that suggest that this man might have been afraid that the demons would come back to him. I don't know. But what we do know is that Jesus had other plans. He said, you go back and tell others what God has done for you. And that's just natural. Folks, the people had seen a life changed. They saw a man who'd been tormented by these demons. The man that lived among the dead in the tombs. And he was suddenly in his right mind. And the people still asked Jesus to leave. But Jesus told this man, said, you go tell others what I've done. And the one that had experienced this, expressed that he could not hold it back about Jesus. Luke says, and he went away proclaiming throughout the whole city how much Jesus had done for him. So that's another question we have to ask today. Are we telling people how much Jesus has done for us? Are we telling what Jesus can do for others? When I think of this passage, I wonder if the people of that day had gotten comfortable with evil. Hey, he was back there in the tombs, leave him alone. He's not bothering me. But I believe our society has gotten comfortable with evil. And instead of confronting evil with Jesus, we say, well, push it to the side. Several years ago, William Bennett, who was the U.S. Secretary of Education under President Reagan, and then the director of the Office of the National Drug Council Policy under President George H.W. Bush, that's the first one, wrote a book called The Death of Outrage. And this book examined the public's tolerance for political corruption and people's misconduct. There was a time when some of the things you see going on in the world today, what you see going on in Washington, there's a time when people would just be outraged and wouldn't tolerate it. But now we seem to accept it. Oh, that's just normal. And then we look at the evil in the world around us and seem to tolerate. Have we become numb to sin? Have we become numb to evil? Sometimes it seems like we seem to want everything to happen in Frankfurt or Washington, instead of saying, wait a minute, I have an answer. That's Jesus Christ. This week I was reading some sermons about this passage, and I ran across this quote from a Florida preacher, and folks, I can't even pronounce his name. But he said, what's wrong with our community is not so much the presence of drugs and alcohol abuse and violence of crime. What is wrong is there's not a Christian presence in our community to offer hope and healing. So my challenge to you is to do just as this man did. The man who was living amongst the tombs. The man who was walking around naked. He go out and tell people, tell others what Jesus has done in your life. You're weird. You're a fanatic. Guess what? I would guess this man was a fanatic as well. Don't be like the people who were comfortable around evil and say, he's fine there, and then, Jesus, you leave. Boldly share Jesus just as this man did. One of my favorite people to talk with was Joe Bonsall, who was a long-time tenor for the Oak Ridge Boys. I saw his second concert with that group in 1973, and I saw them over 40 times, including one of his final shows with the group at Christmas of 2023. Joe passed away last year. He had ALS, and it was becoming very obvious he was very sick the last time we saw him. But I sat down with him back in 2015 for an interview to talk about, not music, but about writing. He had just written a book, and I'll give it a plug here. There's 3 pages there devoted to an email I sent him one day. And I asked him why he wrote so much. And I've never seen this quote from him anywhere else. So I don't think it was practiced. This is just what he said to me directly as I was sitting there in this interview. He said, if you're not going to bring a message of hope and faith, if you're not going to let your light shine based on what you are doing, then your writing is a tinkling cymbal. Obviously, he was quoting or taking on from 1 Corinthians 13. But we have a message of hope. We have a message of faith. That's what this man that Jesus had healed had. He had a message of hope. Instead of being demon-possessed, he said, I have hope in Jesus Christ. That's our message as well. My question for you is, are you willing and ready to share it with others? Let's go to the Lord in prayer.